Hey guys, what's going on? It is Livid. Hope you're all doing very well today. In case you weren't aware already, the Global Event Strike went live in the Division 1 on Monday the 16th, and will continue to run until Monday the 23rd at 12 AM Pacific time. Now is the absolute best time to log in and earn GE credits to unlock classified gear for Nomad, Banshee, Defense, and Predator's Mark. I'll leave a link in the description for an overall breakdown on Strike in case you need that, but very briefly I'll just go over the global modifier because it's pretty important for today's video. The global modifier for this GE will result in enemies triggering an explosion upon death after a short delay. This is active everywhere in the game aside from PvP, so it's a really fun time to play with Tactician, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Tactician can be played in various different ways, the most popular method being an offensive skill damage build, using things like the stationary turret, secret mines, and my personal favorite, the sticky bomb. Since enemies will trigger an explosion after death that deals damage to other nearby targets during this GE, this makes explosion-based skills far more fun to utilize. Today I'll be showing you my favorite way to build Tactician, and I'll give you some alternatives just in case you don't have the same items that I have, or if you would prefer to run it a different way. Here pretty soon I will be making a video that revolves around synergies with Tactician and how you can make the best skill build, so stay tuned for that. But today will just be about a few different Tactician variations to try to improve your experience with the Strike modifier. The first thing we need to assemble this build is a high-end assault rifle with a lower gear score. To do this, just keep an eye at the blueprint vendors inside the terminal in Camp Clinton and just look for any kind of gear score 204 AR. At the time of this recording, there is an ACR blueprint that you can purchase, but like I said, really any lower gear score AR will work as long as it's of high-end rarity. We don't care about the damage of the weapon because we're using a skill build, so don't get hung up too much on how much less damage the gun will have based on its gear score. We only care about unlocking lower stat requirements for the talents that we need to synergize best with Tactician. Also to emphasize to make sure it's of high-end rarity so we get the absolute best enemy armor damage possible from the AR in-class bonus of enemy armor damage. If you lower your standards and use a specialized or a superior item instead, the in-class bonus is going to cap at a lower percentage, and this bonus heavily affects our skill damage output. If the enemy armor damage on your AR is not maxed out at 24%, but it is a high-end item, then it needs to be optimized. You can just take it to the optimization station at either the terminal or Camp Clinton and use Division Tech to optimize it up to its full 24%. So why exactly do we want a lower gear score on our assault rifle? I'm using this LVOAC with Determined, Destructive, and Ferocious. As you can see, since the gear score is lower, it did lower the stat requirements and let me unlock these talents while keeping the same added damage bonuses. Both Ferocious and Destructive will apply to your skills, so it is a good idea to try and craft a gun that you can use to get these talents onto. The third talent is completely up to you. I personally like to use Determined to get my skills back as quickly as possible, but you can also use things like Predatory, Sustained, or Talented for your third talent. But Destructive and Ferocious, in my opinion, are a must-have. It's just too much damage to miss out on a build like this. My secondary is a custom M44 with Talented, Competent, and Cool-Headed on the free slot. I did get pretty lucky with this one because it was for sale at a Dark Zone vendor a pretty long time ago, so otherwise you'll have to wait for other vendors to sell better ones, or craft or find an MMR or a different secondary weapon. Since this MMR is 256 plus gear score, the only talents that we can unlock are Competent and Talented on the top slots. Both are good talents. Competent not as much because we don't need that extra weapon damage necessarily, but it is far better than nothing at all. We'll also be pumping out our skills as fast as we can, so Competent will almost always be unlocked for that extra 10% damage. I personally like having Talented on at least one of my guns for the extra skill power after you get a successful kill with the gun, so I target the weaker enemies for this, like the rushers or the snipers. It makes more sense to have Talented on the weapon that has the most base damage, since it requires the kill to come from the actual gun itself and not your skills. Other talents like Predatory, Sustained, or Determined will come to you from your skill kills, so they're best suited for your lower gear score assault rifle. Another alternative for a secondary weapon that you could consider is pretty much any kind of LMG. The in-class bonus for LMGs is damage to targets out of cover, which actually applies to skill damage as well. I do find that this works out best on enemy skill proxies like the support stations and the turrets. It also works best for the hunters because they don't have an armor bar, so you could instead use an LMG with Competent, Talented, and Determined. I've found that an MG5 is a bit more fun to use because it has a lot higher rate of fire and a faster reload speed, but you could instead use an M60 because they have a higher base damage and magazine size. And for your sidearm, you can really use whatever you'd like. I always have a cool-headed pistol, but you can use whatever. We're pretty much done with the guns already, so let's go ahead and talk about gear. I've chosen to use the Barrett's chest piece for the exotic talent bonuses, which gives me a 10% bonus to skill power when no skills are on cooldown and a 5% damage increase when 2 skills are on cooldown. The third talent doesn't really apply to us, but it does give you some more armor if you don't have any skills active. In the future, I can go into more depth on why the Barrett's is a better choice for this build, but for today I'll just say that Barrett's offers far more damage output opportunities with the first 2 bonuses from the talent. On top of Tactician having really high skill haste, Barrett's is the perfect addition for this build and it really ties everything together. For the attributes on the chest, I've chosen enemy armor damage and skill haste. These 2 make the most sense when you're going for damage output and skill efficiency, but you can also choose health or health on kill to replace either one of these if you'd like to for some more sustainability. Minor attribute really doesn't matter. We aren't really shooting our guns so much, so I've gone for increased kill XP just to try and work on proficiency caches a little bit more, but you can really do ammo capacity if you'd like. Moving to the mask, I would say the mask is arguably one of the most important pieces on any PvE build in general, just due to the attributes that the mask comes with. You will want to make sure that you get enemy armor damage and damage to elites on both the minor and major attribute slots. If you are stuck with skill power on the mask instead of enemy armor damage for the major attribute, you can work with that for now until you get something better. Moving on to the knee pads, these ones also have an enemy armor damage or a skill power option for the major attribute. The skill power on these is much higher than the mask at 13,000 skill power, and the enemy armor damage is very low at 4%. I did do the math on this and found out that 13,000 skill power is going to give you more skill damage than enemy armor, so it is better to choose the skill power role here. In this instance, it's going to yield higher damage output from our skills. For the minor attributes, you'll want to make sure you have damage to elites rolled somewhere at least. The other 2 are personal preference. I personally have burn resistance and disrupt resistance. The disrupt is going to help us out a lot with the hunter waves inside the legendary missions to remove that EMP effect a lot sooner. But you can choose really whatever you'd like for these, as long as damage to elites has been obtained. That's the most important part. The next piece is the inventive backpack. This is going to give us 15% more skill power while at full HP. This helps us out a lot with our first initial skill placements at the beginning of checkpoints. Once you take even a sliver of damage, this bonus does deactivate, so you will need to be very careful. If you don't feel like this best suits you, you can instead do a relentless backpack, which would give you healing from the damage that your skills do. Or you can just run a tactician backpack and run 5 pieces of tactician, which would give you 5% more skill haste and skill power instead. I personally like the extra damage given with inventive, and I find that the early on encounters within the checkpoints matter the most, so I think that it's going to best suit me for my build. Your primary attribute on the backpack should definitely be skill power. The minor attribute can be ammo capacity if you'd like. I personally did disrupt resistance again for further resistance to EMP. The gloves are pretty easy. You'll want EAD, skill haste, and health on kill for the main attributes. These are really the only ones that make sense. You won't want to choose any damage output attributes here like assault rifle or SMG because we aren't doing much weapon damage as it is. You'll want to focus more on attributes that increase your skill damage output and efficiency. The health on kill is just a nice little added bonus. It does help you get from one health segment to the other. And finally, the holster really is also simple. Just put skill haste. There's nothing else here that would really make sense for this slot. If you are using a classified tactician holster, a really good way to save yourself some division tech is to recalibrate the lowest main stat for the main credits instead of optimizing the entire holster from scratch for division tech. Since you're only recalibrating one of the stats, it's going to present you with 3 options for the same stat instead of 1 like other gear items, so you should get a pretty good stat roll fairly quickly. If we check out the overall stats on the build so far, I have almost 60% damage to elites and 61% enemy armor damage with 40% skill haste, and we are over 430,000 skill power. Let's take a look at our skills and our ability talents as well. I am of course using the BFB sticky. The only time you'll want to take the BFB off and use the basic sticky is if someone on your team is running Predator's Mark. The bleed from your BFB would prevent the Pred player from activating their bleed bonus. Otherwise, the BFB does much higher damage and should be used over the basic at all times. I am also using Seeker Mines for extra spread damage, but you can use the turret instead if you'd like to. Again, if someone on your team is running Predator's Mark, it is recommended to really just change your build altogether, or at least change your skills so it doesn't inflict bleed to counter your teammate's build. In fact, if your teammate is running Predator, one of the best things that you could do is just change your cluster mines over to a pulse instead. That way your teammate does far more bleed damage, and you yourself have some added damage as well. Before any damage to elites and enemy armor damage bonuses, my sticky is hitting for around 1.4 million with only the first bonus from Barrett's chest active. After the damage to elites and enemy armor damage bonuses, my sticky hits for around 2.5 million. As the Tactician player, you have the most skill cooldown out of anyone on your team, so be sure to rotate your signature ability based on the team's need. If everyone already has a recovery link equipped, I would personally change it to attack link and then make the security link secondary for an added bonus to weapon damage for your teammates. And finally, for ability talents, the two must-haves here in my opinion are Demolition Expert and Chain Reaction, but I would say Chain Reaction is the most important. If you are taking off the cluster mines, you could take off Demo Expert if you'd like to. You could still find some value with Demo Expert, but you would have to be pretty quick without the cluster mines. I'm also running Combat Medic to help out my teammates with medkit heals, and I'm also running Death by Proxy to increase my skill power whenever I destroy enemy skill proxies like the support station or turrets. The best way to benefit from all of your abilities is to wait for either a medic or an engineer to go and repair their skill. If you attach the sticky to either the NPC or the skill itself while they're repairing, you can easily activate Demolition Expert, Chain Reaction, and Death by Proxy all in one swoop. If you are running solo, I would take Combat Medic off for either Shrapnel to spread the bleed damage from your Seeker Mines, or Strike Back for faster skill cooldowns while you're at low HP. There you guys have it. That is my main Tactician build. I've definitely done a couple videos of Tactician in the past, but I've made some tweaks here and there, and I've in general gotten better at editing videos and whatnot, so I'm pretty happy to talk about Tactician again. I'm hoping that this was beneficial for you guys. I'm hoping that you guys are having fun with the Strike Global event as well. If you have any other questions about Tactician, just leave a comment down below and I'll try and answer as many questions as I can. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.
Can't believe the bullshit that went down in the dark zone at the end there.
I know. We had it. Everything I told them was dead on. They made us pull out anyway.
And we left our dead behind.
Yeah, we're not supposed to do that. Hang on a second.